Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Play, Pause, Rewind for our 57th episode. Sorry we're a couple days late with this, but we wanted to wait for the movie we're talking about to come out, and we were on vacation with some friends, and I've been sick a little bit, so there were lots of reasons for the delay. But, Niles, how have you been since our last recording session?
I've been good. Like you said, we took a small vacation, got out to Los Angeles,
Yes.
and got to explore some of California. That was my first time out to California. So shout out to anyone who's listening from California. Beautiful state, beautiful area to explore. So I'm very glad we got to go out there and check out some stuff. I do not appreciate airports, but that's you got to do what you got to do to get where you want to go. So
Yeah, no, airports suck.
yeah, exactly. But I've been good, and yeah, I think I was sick going to the LA, and then I think coming back, you were sick, Dylan.
Yes, this is your fault.
Yes, I'm the one to blame here. So apologies. But
But
how are you
right.
otherwise, Dylan?
Oh, pretty good. Just doing the same old shit. But
Yeah.
excited to talk about this movie, which some people might say was a surprise hit, but I actually had some confidence in it. We are talking about Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves this week. And you may be asking yourself, dear viewer, why aren't y'all talking about John Wick Chapter 4? Well, one, I haven't had a chance to see it yet. And two, Niles hasn't had a chance to see the first three yet. So maybe we'll do it next episode, or maybe we'll just do it on do a little mini review of it on our second YouTube channel that we have now.
Yeah.
Yes, Play Pause Rewind videos, which is where you can find the non-spoiler sections of all of our podcast episodes, YouTube shorts, and eventually other reviews that we're not doing full podcast episodes on. So yeah, go check that out. But Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves is directed by John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein, and is written by Daly, Goldstein, and Michael Gillio. Movie stars Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, Regé-Jean Page, Justice Smith, Sophia Lillis, Hugh Grant, Chloe Coleman, and Daisy Head. And in typical D&D fashion, the story centers around a group of adventurers who must band together to save the world. But it is a little bit more interesting. It's got more going on than that. But we'll save the specifics for spoilers. And it's set in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting from the tabletop game. But yeah, Niles, what did you think, non-spoilers, about Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves?
When this trailer first dropped, I think for this movie, I think I was in the camp of never gonna see that, or kind of that camp of that doesn't speak to me, kind of thing, or just like one of those movies where it feels like this is gratuitous or unnecessary kind of feel. Which, to be fair, a lot of cinema is unnecessary, it's gratuitous. But I think some of our readers might get what I mean there. Could just feel like a movie that they're just making for a quick buck,
like a cash grab. That's what you thought.
It's just a cash grab. Exactly.
Cash on the IP.
Yeah, exactly. It's just an IP. It's something that she can make some money off of. But I was very surprised with this movie, because it was a lot of fun. Like, this is honestly a lot better than I was expecting it to be. And I think in the cinematic universe, or just like cinema in general, there's not a lot of board game adaptations, and the ones that we've gotten have either been like pretty like cut and clear, like Clue, or like something like Battleship that's just like a total fucking, like, it just sinks really quick. So this movie, I think, just like definitely surprised me in just like the terms of quality, the humor, just all around the board. I was impressed with this movie, and I'm fairly positive on it. I really don't have too many complaints, honestly. So yeah, Dylan, what about you? What are your initial thoughts?
Yes, I'm also very positive on it, and I was pretty confident going into it because Daly and Goldstein made the film Game Night, which with Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams, and that's a very funny movie. I would say one of the stronger comedies from the last several years. So knowing that and watching the trailer and just being a fan of D&D myself, I've played several campaigns. I was really excited and hopeful for this. And just with the cast, I mean, Chris Pine, Hugh Grant, Michelle Rodriguez, like that's a great, lead ensemble for something like this. And the thing that had me, the thing that gave me pause basically was like D&D as a setting, like the Forgotten Realms. It's meant for you to be able to design your own campaigns and storylines within it, right? So it has lots of very interesting and unique stuff in it, but in lazy writing hands, you could very easily get like an uninspired Lord of the Rings knockoff, right? So I was very glad that that's not what we got here. We got a film that's very tonally fun, has a simple but effective narrative, and a fun cast of characters. So
yeah, it was pretty solid. And I didn't realize this before going into the movie that there were previous like Dungeons and Dragons films from like a long time ago, like
early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, like stuff that is not related at all to this. This is its own thing, and it's just basically a fucking heist movie, set in a medieval world, which is just a genius, I think, narrative for a Dungeons and Dragons film. Because you've played Dungeons and Dragons, I have not. I want to play it. I want to set up a campaign because it sounds like a blast where you could just dive into this role, figure out your character, and just work as a team to get to your end goal, this quest. And the quest is just a heist in this movie so that way Chris Pine, not to get too far into spoilers, he can reconnect with his daughter. This kind of whole thing. So I think there's a lot of creativity in this movie, and it's just a lot of fun the whole way through. Like, I don't think there weren't too many moments in the film where I was pausing and saying, why am I watching this again? Kind of deal. Right. As the movie went on, I just continued to go along with it and just enjoyed it more and more, honestly. Like, I honestly have like maybe a handful of complaints and they're minimal at best. They're nitpicky things.
Yeah, and I would say it's not even really a criticism because it's fine, but the plot is pretty paint by numbers in terms of narrative beats, but it works and it executes everything it's trying to do really well. And beyond that, I'll elaborate in spoilers what I mean by this, but I think to a surprising degree manages to translate the feeling of playing D&D into a film's narrative, which I thought was really impressive. And also, it's a funny movie, and I think the jokes landed for the most part and blended pretty organically into the narrative. It wasn't a quip a minute to where it got annoying, but the characters were funny and joked around with each other, which if you've ever played D&D, that is what it's like. It would be almost inappropriate to have a D&D movie without jokes and humor.
Well, and I was thinking about this too, of especially since our last review was The Last of Us, where we talked about a video game adaptation, and this week Dungeons and Dragons. This is a board game adaptation, and like we said, there's not a lot of board game adaptations, and
well, it's not a board game; it's pen and paper. It's a little bit different,
yes,
but
we
would get comments.
Broad strokes, yeah. And I think there's a couple of different ways that they could have gone about this adaptation, and one of which I think I was kind of worried that they were going to go for was more of a Jumanji-esque kind of story, where it's maybe a group of nerds or like group of players, whatever. They're gaming in a basement, and then you just kind of get sucked into their little fantasy world. Yeah. But I think, that narrative, it would present kind of inaccuracies in how these characters or roles are presented, because, it's the real person in the real world, and then their perspective is kind of warped through the role. So, just kind of like, I think in the Jumanji films, it's like, this very attractive, flirty girl, and then she comes into Jack Black's body, kind of thing. I haven't seen those movies, so I'm not very familiar.
They're great. They're really
fun.
You should watch them.
But... Yeah, but then, that can kind of skew the like character representation in the film. And then if, we're going for more of an authentic feel, it's like, well, then... I think
it wouldn't be Chris Pine's character, it'd be someone playing Chris Pine's. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it would be someone else playing the role of Chris Pine. So I'm glad that they didn't go that route. And then I think another route that they could have taken as well as more of a straightforward adaptation which kind of what this was, but maybe it just more leans heavily into the characteristics of D&D, like maybe needing to roll a 5 to get across this bridge, or like you're about to face this troll and the dungeon master is going to explain the rules to you, which I think would have been definitely the wrong choice for like a narrative like this. And so I think the third option, is obviously you create your own narrative set within this universe. And I think it's a universe that people are already, at least fans, are familiar with. You understand the roles, the characters, the geography of the land as well. And that it's definitely like going to help you in the long run as this film. So I'm glad that they went with that route and not trying to like do more of a, you're in my basement and then it's like,
right. They don't lean into the
worlds.
gaminess of it. They just treat it as a setting to tell their story in, which
yes, absolutely.
Yes. And yeah, I would really say this is an easy recommend for most people, even if you're not a huge fantasy nerd or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just a fun adventure movie. It's a good time. There's really not a lot to knock, so I would recommend this to most people, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah. And I think for me, the humor is the winning element here, because there are some formulaic elements throughout the way. And it's more, I think, the structural part of the story where, you got the main beats, you have the villain, or you have these like specific parts along the story that you can kind of predict, but that's more of the structure of like this type of narrative of a heist story.
It's very
tropey. Peaks and valleys. Yeah. You kind of know what's going to happen, but at the same time you don't. And but the humor, I think, was the thing that worked so well in this film. Like, the costume design was great. Like all the different characters and the lore that we got to explore was awesome. The world building was just so unique, and I just enjoyed basking in that for a bit. But there were so many moments throughout this movie where a joke landed, and it wasn't off-putting like Thor 4, like we kind of talked about before, where it's a cancer diagnosis and then all of a sudden a joke. This is more like it blends well. It's part of the story, and then they also were able to integrate some of those D&D elements, but subtly. It wasn't too on the nose of you have to roll a 5 to get past this point or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and it's and also visual effects wise, aside from a couple shots here and there, I think everything blended pretty well together. The sets looked lived in to me. Still very high fantasy-esque, but yeah, overall. Do you want to transition into spoilers at this point?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. And even if you aren't a huge fantasy nerd, I think this is still definitely a recommend. Like we definitely recommended this to all our friends of like, even if you've never played D&D, I think you're going to enjoy this film. It's going to be fun and you're going to laugh throughout it too. So definitely recommend.
Yep. All right. So spoilers. So the plot basically centers around Edgin, Chris Pine's character. He wants to reunite with his daughter after he and Holga, Michelle Rodriguez, have been imprisoned in a like high security jail in Icewind Dale for a couple of years. Heist went wrong. They got caught in this slowing spell, and standing in their way is their former crew member Forge, played by Hugh Grant, who has lied to Edgin's daughter about what happened, and also this dark wizard Safina. And the two of them are working together. They have their own separate plans. They don't particularly like each other, but they're using each other for their own ends. Great little setup for this story. And I do like the idea that we're telling a smaller story in this big world. I think it allows, like I said earlier, it would be so easy to fall into the trap of trying to do a Lord of the Rings thing and not doing it very well. Like there are dark wizards and dark forces coming, but that's not the focus here. It's sort of a secondary threat to the main plot. Like they save the day, but it's really about saving the kid. And I think that works really well for this film.
Yeah. And it is ultimately about this group of characters, Edgin, Holga, the mage, Simon. Yes, thank you. And the others that are there. You're kind of this outcast group, which is nice, that they're all their own people, their own defined characters with their own traits and abilities and stuff like that. But I think the defining characteristic through a lot of them is that, they're outcasts. They're they're not the best. They're not like what everyone thinks of when they think of a wizard or a mage or someone who's protecting the forest or like, someone who
she
can
was a
transform,
druid, I
like the
think.
mimic. Yeah. You have these, it's just a nice group of like outcasts kind of banding together, this group of thieves. Yeah. Doing like going along this quest, even though the ultimate quest is just reuniting Edgin and his daughter. They're all just kind of along for the ride, and it's nice to see. I know they all have their own motivations for joining the quest. It's not just kind of like, yeah, I'll do it because I got no purpose to live. It's like, no, it's because I want to protect the forest. It's because, oh, I need the money. It's because, oh, you're my family. I need to be there. So there's good justification for things that are going on in this film and with the narrative in general.
Yeah, you want to talk about the world building a little bit? You have some notes here.
Yeah,
right?
that was another part that I really enjoyed in this film because, yeah, along the way, you're more familiar with the geography of this world and everything and what's going on, all the world. But, we recently did a podcast episode on Ant-Man 3, and I kind of wanted to just bring that back up very briefly, not to touch on it too much, but I think one of the failings of that movie was the world building. They didn't dive too far into the characters that they established and bringing them to life and really expanding on them and giving us a chance to soak in the scenery. They moved very, very quickly. And I think this film, at certain points, maybe it could have dived a little bit deeper, but I think Dungeons and Dragons did a much better job of actually building up the world, exploring it, giving us this insight into these different communities, these different cultures, these different people, the world in general. Like, there's this whole, like the first, like probably 15 minutes of the film is taking place in that ice prison. And that was so cool just to see all the different like races, all the different kind of people there and how they escaped. But it also builds up the world of the Harpers, understanding what that whole guild is about and how our main character Edgin gets into prison. And I think that they just did a good amount of time of building up people and establishing, these different aspects of the lore.
Yeah, it takes its time to establish a sense of place for the different locations of the film. And obviously the world of D&D is much larger than what we see here, but we spend a lot of time in Neverwinter. We get to sort of know what's going on in the city. We spend the first couple minutes in that prison in Icewind Dale and the little villages around the town. So yeah, you're right. It does, unlike Ant-Man 3, where it's like everything just feels like an empty void. There is actually like stuff and life in all of these places.
Yeah.
Another thing, I really like the choice to make our protagonist of a fantasy adventure film someone who's not really that good at combat.
Yeah.
I think that's something we rarely see and was a fun little twist. Like, he really has to rely on Holga for the physical altercation stuff. Like, I love when they're first escaping Forge's men and she is just doing all the combat while he's like trying to cut his ropes the entire time and he doesn't contribute until the very end. It was great. Yeah. It was a fun little twist. And he doesn't ever like, it's not part of his arc to get better at fighting or anything like that. That's just not his thing. He plans and he plays music. He's a bard.
Yeah. He's the mastermind. He's just there to like steer the ship. Yeah. I thought that was hilarious. And that's one of those great comedic beats where just the whole time he's just trying to get out of these cuffs and she's just kicking the shit out of everybody. I thought that was very funny. But I think one example that kind of stuck with me for a very, I don't know, maybe more personal and interesting reasons, but there's this character who's introduced probably about halfway through the film. I think I'm getting his name right. It's Zenx Yundar, the Fey warrior. When we get introduced to him, it's kind of this 2-minute long sequence or a few minute long sequence of him, rescuing basically this baby cat person from the mouth of this fish.
Oh, yeah.
Which doesn't tell us a lot, honestly, but I thought that was just such an interesting sequence because you get to understand him as a character. Like, he's obviously incredibly knowledgeable. He knows what he's doing in this world and he can speak to fucking fish, kind of deal. I'm sure there's more under the surface there that I'm not picking up on, but that sequence without speaking a lot of words. Like there was not a lot of dialogue during that sequence, but it gave us a insight about the people in the village, how they trust him, the way of life in the village as well. And you also got to see a good amount of like variety of races there on the screen. Like the cat people was just like, oh my God, that's cool. Like these cat people standing there that everything is about the same, except they're just cats. And I think it just did a good job of establishing his role in the community and then also building in the world of check out this community, check out these different races and like all this kind of underlying subtext of how people can interact with the with animals and nature around them.
Yeah. I also love his character because up until this point, we're led to believe like this race is all evil and they do bad things and they killed Chris Pine's family. And then we get this introduction to Zank being like this completely pure-hearted, good paladin guy who has no sense of humor whatsoever, but is just completely good and kind. And it felt like a very it felt like a character that a D&D player would make. It's like, I'm going to take this typically evil race and make the most cartoonishly good person possible and just walk around and being nice, like be nice to everybody. It was very funny. It was very funny in a straight man sort of way, you know, like he doesn't crack jokes and that's what makes him funny. He doesn't even understand humor.
Yeah.
Like he's kind of like Drax in a way, but a little less overstated, you know.
He's smarter than Drax.
Yeah.
But so the Fae, I guess maybe that was something I didn't pick up on. So the Fae are like historically kind of like an evil.
Well, like all those like red wizards, like the evil lady, like that they were the leaders of that society or something like that. I don't know much about them in the lore, but the movie and Chris Pine was like, my family was killed by them. And so it's and he's like, there are no good ones of these or whatever. So maybe Chris Pine's a little bit prejudiced due to his own personal experience.
Sure.
But I beyond that, I felt like all the characters had just enough going on with their personalities and what they're given to do in the story to make it work for this type of movie. Like no one is wildly deep here, but they don't really need to be. They all work well for what this is. And everyone gets their moments to shine, which I think is really important if you're trying to adapt a D&D, which is a party-based game, you know. It's not like Chris Pine is our main character, but everybody has to have their moment for this to really work as D&D, you know. Maybe that's not true, but I think it is a cool element that they were able to bring over from the game.
Yes. Well, and I think that is very important in a film like this and like even like, you know, other board games. I know it's not technically a board game, but like Clue, for instance, you know, everyone in that movie needs to have time on the screen to shine, to establish their character, establish motive, and like what they are trying to get out of the whole situation. And I think this movie did a very good job as well of giving, you know, Holga, the mage, which I'm blanking on his name, the shapeshifter, Chris Pine's character, Edgin, you know, all these characters had their time on the screen to talk about what they are trying to achieve, where they came from as well, and you know what their emotional connection is to the story, their motivation. So everyone kind of gets their own beats along the way, which is just fantastic. And there's just so many unique and diverse locations here. You know, you have a Hobbiton kind of looking area that we go to with Holga where she reconnects with her old flame.
Oh, that was so funny.
Yeah, so funny, and such an unexpected cameo too. I was not expecting to see Bradley Cooper there.
I know, that was hilarious. And also just he's just so tiny and he has a thing for giant women.
Yeah. It's perfect. And then, you know, we go to like an underground like dungeon,
the Underdark.
An Underdark where there's a dragon. And then we go to, and then, you know, we have the ice place. Then we have kind of like a location, to me, just because of Game of Thrones, it kind of resembles King's Landing, but I know it's its own place.
Neverwinter. It's supposed to be like the most high fantasy city in the Sword Coast, I think, is that specific region. So it's very like happy and sunshine and like fun fantasy, which I think they did a good job of executing here.
Yes,
there are other big cities in that part of the world that are more like gritty, and this is one of the more like fluffy like Cinderella castle style cities, I think was
Yeah,
my interpretation.
totally. But yeah, all the locations are super neat. And yeah, again, you're more familiar with the world here, but it seems like at least within the Forgotten Realms, there's a lot more to explore. Just like you were saying,
Hmm.
there's other cities, there's other locations to go check out, which means that there's so much potential, like of sequels, of other stories to tell in this universe, which I hope that they do.
Yeah.
But I think the movie did a good job of bringing this universe to the screen and not kind of doing a very generic gloss over of fantasy world. It's this world feels lived in. We have these different races, we have these different people all trying to
Hmm.
coexist, and all these different people that are trying to like move up in the ladder as well,
Yeah.
like Hugh Grant's character or the Red Wizards as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and let's talk about like game adaptations, board game, pen and paper adaptations a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. This is last episode we did a video game adaptation. This is a pen and paper style, but it's kind of a weird medium to adapt to movies, right? Because it's not really like D&D is more narrative based than other games, I suppose, but the
Mm-hmm.
narrative is very free form. So it does kind of give you a lot of freedom, but almost maybe no direction when you're adapting it. And I think they were able to navigate that pretty well. But
Yes, yeah, and I know I've brought it up a few times already of like these other adaptations that come to mind for me,
mhm.
and maybe they're not entirely fair, and that's okay because I haven't seen a lot of board game adaptations. But I think the main ones that come to mind, just for comparison's sake, is like Battleship and Clue. Um, I never saw either of those. I would like to see Clue at some point because
Mhm.
of the cast. Because I just know there's a lot of famous people in that movie, and I would
Yeah.
like to see. But comparatively to, let's just say, Battleship for the time being, this is D&D. Honor Among Thieves is far and away much better than that colossal blockbuster fuck up. Because Battleship, in comparison, is a very limited game. You have 5 ships to shoot on each side of the screen of the I guess just game set,
Bored.
and
Yeah.
that's 10 ships total, and that's kind of it. You can fire 1 shot per turn, and that's it. So you don't have much narrative to go on from there. Like I think the
Right. It was a
people,
weird choice to make an adaptation out of Battleship of all things.
yeah,
I
I
think
remember
that
as a
I think that felt like an IP cash grab to me. I never saw it either, so I won't like comment on the quality of it, but I was kind of like, why are you making this?
yeah, well, honestly, that's kind of what I thought it was too. It was like on the tail end of these big blockbuster, just like triumphs, or just like, or not triumphs,
Mhm.
just big blockbuster movies of just like Transformers. Let's just throw whatever we can get at the wall, like at the wall, and see what sticks. And I think that's kind of the general critique when that movie was coming out, of like Hollywood's scraping the bottom of the barrel now,
Right.
but they kind of still are to a degree. But Battleship is certainly like much lower on the totem pole, and it's very easy to see why that movie failed. Is because they thought that there was a narrative there. They thought they could string something together
Mhm.
based off of this like board game that had no substance at all. And I
Yep.
think that they assumed that they could just bring in some big names like Rihanna, and see if they could just make some quick money. But with D&D, I think why this movie works in comparison is because you already have this expansive world of lore. You have these defined maps, these defined roles to fill, and everything. So it falls in this similar category as Clue, where you have these loose narrative elements that you can fill. It gives you more of a linear path to follow, because in D&D, yeah, you're just working towards a quest. You have an end goal in mind, and your party, you're just working towards that.
Yep.
So you have some flexibility to get creative, especially when you come across these challenges of like you encounter a troll in the dungeon. What is your next move as a team? And you know that
Mhm.
your mage can only send so many or cast so many spells, and you only have this much like health, and you have to think creatively on your feet. And in Battleship, that's not the case. It's just very limited of here's the rules, let's just go. But D&D gives you so much more to work with.
Yeah, but and like anything can be good though, right?
Sure.
Like our Arcane, for example. League of Legends has a lot of lore, but the game of League of Legends is not a story-based game. But they made something great out of it because they put the right care and attention into it. And I think that's the big differentiating factor, right? Is I can't speak to Battleship's quality, but I can say for this, like they seem to actually give a shit about the story they were telling, and they, put the work in to make it fun and enjoyable. And but yeah, D&D is a gold mine for lore because there's just so much there you can pull from, and you can like plug and play in interesting ways. You can use the different elements of the universe together in ways that might not be expected. But we get some like fun little comedic beats that twist expectations along the way. Like we have a dragon fight, for example, but everybody has an image in their head about what a fight with a dragon looks like. This one's a little bit different because the dragon is a big fat dragon. And instead of flying and chasing them, it's like rolling around on the ground, trying to crush them. It kind of reminded me of the end of Prometheus when they're like, when the donut ship is rolling and for some reason they don't run to the side. It kind of reminded me of that, except they can't run to the side because it's horizontal.
Yeah.
But that whole sequence was really funny too, because we have our paladin Zank, the very self-serious guy. He's like explaining all of the mechanics they have to deal with to cross this bridge, and then Simon accidentally steps on a tile of the bridge, which collapses the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh wait, this item that we picked up earlier, like it can teleport. Like, we'll just do that. That works.
Yeah. It's very way it's a very creative way of weaving in these elements that you weren't expecting, of like, oh, we picked up this item earlier and now it's going to come in handy. Of okay, that's awesome. I love that we didn't know its purpose and now we do. But yeah, all the comedic beats along the way are just really funny. Like, yeah, the fat dragon doing barrel rolls. Yeah, the bridge falling apart. I also really liked how they, at the start of the film, they're explaining, here's how we got into the prison, here's all this like stuff, and he just keeps stopping the story and be like, is Jonathan coming? Because we need Jonathan to hear this story. And then the minute he gets there, they take him and like try and jump out the window with him because he could fly.
Yeah. And it's such a great like build up too, because I was just assuming, and I think you're meant to assume, oh, he's a friend, or he's someone who knows them and he'll be sympathetic to their cause. It's like, no, they just want his wings.
Yeah, it's so funny. I thought they were going to be pardoned.
Yeah, which is a great setup for the end of the movie too, when Forge tries to do the same thing, but they've learned and have replaced the window with a rock wall. Which was really good, I thought. And oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really liked Forge as a character too. Like Hugh Grant, you don't see him in these kind of roles where he's the villain or a villain type character, like an antagonist. And he's because you always just envision him as this charming, stuttering romantic lead in a rom-com, like, I feel like we've just seen it a million times. And he is a very handsome man, but he was able to use that charm in such a way that like just emphasized his jokes, emphasized the humor even more. Like his delivery was so funny, of like, I don't want to let you die, so I'm going to go in the other room.
Like, I don't want to see you die, so I'm going to look away.
Like,
he's very funny, and he's not evil. He's just like a dick. He's a selfish asshole.
I thought he was just so funny throughout the movie, but there were some great jokes peppered through, like in the dialogue, not just for Forge, but like everyone. Like I remember Chris Pine's character Edgin, they're like talking about what are their different roles in the group, like what do they bring to the table, and then she's like, so you just came up with the plan, and he's like, yeah. It's like, well, what do we need you for now? Like the plan's already here. Made. Like
it's like, well, if the plan fails, then I make a new plan. It's like, okay, so you make bad plans. No.
No, I make good plans. But you don't.
But it was we also got a nice little arc for Edgin, Chris Pine's character, in that like he realizes that he's been focused on not bringing back his daughter's mother, but bringing back his wife. And then it comes to, I think, a pretty appropriate conclusion at the end when Holga is killed and he has to use a little magic stone to bring either her back or his wife back, and he chooses her. Nice little want versus need thing going on there. Again, it's not complicated, right? But it's not trying to be, so that's not a knock against it.
Yeah,
It works perfectly well.
yeah, I agree. I think this movie isn't trying to be like groundbreaking or anything like that. It's very straightforward in the fantasy realm of here's a story you're going to get. It's got to be just fun, kick back, and just enjoy. Like, we're
Right.
not just going to like beat you over the head with some social commentary or something like that. This is just a fun adventure film, you know?
Yeah, and it I think when people say stuff like that, like it often sounds like a knock, but like
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing to be very straightforward and just do what you're trying to do exceedingly well. I think that's a really good idea sometimes, and sometimes it's exactly what a movie needs, and I feel that way here. But
Yes.
beyond that, like I said earlier, non-spoilers, I think it does a surprisingly good job at translating elements of playing D&D into the film. Like one of the best jokes in the movie is when they resurrect a corpse and Simon's spell or item, whatever he has, gives them 5 questions they can ask it, which they're all joking about how that seems like a very arbitrary rule, and it is, because it's like, oh, that's just how it is in the D&D book. So that's how the spell works. That's what we got. But it they fuck up because they keep asking each other questions or mistakenly asking him questions, and they all count as the 5 questions, and he goes back to sleep. And that just felt like such a great moment of like all the players are kind of like bickering about what to ask in the game, and the DM is like, I'm gonna be a bit of an ass, and all of those are gonna count for questions. So that was a very D&D moment. And then afterward they keep waking up other people until they get the information they need, which is another fun D&D thing, because it's like that's a workaround you would do, right? As a player, it's like, oh, the DM's like, well, the spell only works for 5 questions. It's like, well, we're gonna do the spell a lot of times. Then we're just gonna keep using it.
Yeah.
And then the other one was them using Jonathan to escape the prison when their initial plan had already worked. Right, like
Yeah.
I can totally see like a D&D party is like working on 2 sort of like workshopping 2 ideas, and one plan is already like they're like they were gonna get released because Chris Pine's story worked, but he wasn't confident enough in it. So he just went back to plan A and grabbed the guy
Yeah.
and jumped out a window. Like that was really funny. Um,
Yeah.
Also Simon and the Sophina, the evil wizard witch, like their fight was them using like rocks and magic stuff to arm wrestle, basically. That felt like something a player would do in D&D.
Yeah.
Another,
Honestly.
yeah, and then another thing I loved was they used their portal staff. They're like, okay, we can. This is the best example, I think. It's like, okay, we're gonna use this item we have, this staff that can make a portal. We're gonna attach it to a painting. We're gonna put the painting in the car, and then the car is gonna go in the vault. And it's like that is something that my party and I would have cooked up, right? And then what always would happen is DM's like, okay, roll a D10 or something. And then you roll the wrong number. Oh no, the painting is fallen down in the thing. You can't get through. It was so perfectly done. And the way the scene itself is very funny, because you see like the guards are kind of seeing like people on the hill fucking around, and they see legs under the cart. Like it's really just everything felt like creative things players would do, or creative things the DM would implement as a result of dice rolls gone wrong or gone really well. And it just was a really great way of translating the goofiness of Dungeons and Dragons into the movie without breaking the lore, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I agree. I thought that was just one of the greatest or the greater parts of this movie. Yeah, being able to blend the creativity of the game into the narrative. And yeah, like when you're in a campaign, you gotta rely on your wits. You gotta rely on your know-how, the skills of the people in your party, and your inventory, and that's kind of it. So
It's
it's
all
like
about
if something,
creativity.
yeah, if it doesn't work, you're shit out of luck, and you're gonna lose. Like you have to really think on your feet. It's kind of like improv. Yeah, like yes,
It's
and
very
we're
much
going and
improv.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and things aren't going to go to plan. There's so much left to chance, just like the painting falling over. And the narrative did an excellent job of merging that creative thinking of the characters into the actual story's resolution. And like even at the end, like when the Red Wizard is releasing her spell and it's going to
Yeah,
turn everyone into those like zombie
the
creatures or
zombie
whatever.
things. Yeah.
What they do to get everyone out of the stadium is that, and I don't think that they even really necessarily realized that they were doing it. That's my interpretation, but they, created the portal through the hot air balloon to dump all the treasure on the streets.
Yeah,
And
to
yes,
drag everyone out of
to
the
drag everyone out.
stadium.
And Chris
Yep.
Pine was fulfilling his promise of, yes, I'm giving the money back to the people, the riches. And that was his way of doing that. But it was also just a good way of luring everybody out, like eliminating that threat entirely before it had a chance to manifest. And that was just such a creative way. And it was a creative way to spur the antagonist too, of like, oh yeah, you fucked up, you lost all your riches, Forge, and yeah, you got no one to blame but yourself. So
Right. It was really, yeah, the whole movie is just like all of them using creative solutions to like solve their problems. I also love Simon's little arc about his lack of confidence in himself, and he has to attune to the helmet, which is a D&D thing. It's like when you find a magic item, you have to it can only be attuned to one person at a time, and it takes time to do. So like if you can't like get the full benefits of this item unless you do the attunement process, which was a fun little thing. But it was like a game mechanic, but they worked it into his character arc too, so it didn't feel like a video gamey thing. Like when a bad video game adaptation tries to have like this is the moment where it's a video game, and it never really works that well. It worked with his character. And I'm just another note. I'm really glad that they didn't kill off Forge, because this way they can use him in a sequel if they have to like reluctantly team up or something like that. I don't know, but it would be a shame to get rid of Hugh Grant if you don't have to.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's just go through a couple D&D references that I caught through the thing.
Sure.
So there was the gelatinous cube in the arena, which is the cube they jump into to escape, but also like dissolves everything that's in it.
Was that an actual thing from D&D?
Yeah, it is. It's like a big jelly cube. The Red Wizards of Thay, which is what Safina was. I don't know a whole lot about them other than that they are part of D&D. The Mimic was that treasure chest that was actually a chompy mouth. You see those in Dark Souls as well.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, that's a Dark Souls thing, not a D&D thing. What are you doing?
We get I'm forgetting the girl tiefling's name, but she transforms into an owl bear. The druid character does. The Harpers, the organization that Chris Pine was a part of, are part of D&D lore as well. Displacer Panther is one of the beasts in the arena, the one with the like mirage version of itself.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. And Neverwinter, of course, and Icewind Dale. So Icewind Dale is like the northernmost region, the frozen waste area, and then Neverwinter is the main setting of the film. So there were probably more, but those were the ones I caught. And of course, also all the characters are D&D classes. So
yes, and there were those small things of like we were talking about earlier with the paladin character of being like, you have to step on every fifth spot on the bridge and then every odd spot after that in order to be able to cross. And it's like, that is very clearly like something that a D&D dungeon master would do, of like, you have to roll these die in this series to get across the bridge. So they had those small subtle references sprinkled throughout, which I thought was pretty great. And then I just only want to talk about the climactic final fight in Neverwinter for a second. We kind of touched on it very briefly. Safina reveals herself to be this red wizard, and she starts to like release her power and whatever. She's not, she was probably the least developed character of them all, and that's totally fine. We didn't need anything from her besides just her being the main antagonist. And
I did love though that she just like fucking hated Forge. Like
I enjoyed
she was
that.
so sick of him and she wanted to leave. I thought that was really funny.
I thought that was hilarious. But you know, I think with other movies, this fight would have been the moment of just peak CGI, where they would just thrown a whole bunch of zombie monsters in there, a whole bunch of creatures, a whole bunch of things for our heroes to fight, or just a lot of stuff to happen in the background. And I'm very glad that they didn't take that approach because, you know, like we were saying, this is a story about this party. This is their quest to get to the end here and, you know, succeed. And the final battle felt very self-contained within the party against the Red Wizard, and it's felt appropriate for the D&D storyline. Like, we didn't have this over-the-top CGI fight of the owl bear, you know, hitting a whole bunch of zombie creatures out of the way or anything like that. They had to rely on their wits and the lessons that they learned along the way, and then they called back to the
slowing
original
spell.
times. Yeah, the slow down time spell from the beginning that got them captured in the first place. They knew that was coming, and they said, okay, we're going to work around that. We're going to find a way. And, you know, it's just clever. And it was something that I should have expected, and I'm surprised that I didn't clock it when it was happening.
Right. Yeah, it was really satisfying, and I agree. It worked better that it was small scale. Like,
yes.
Because they were using their planning and their cleverness to like get the potential zombie army out of the line of fire, and you know, it just works. It's just a fun movie overall.
Yeah. Super fun.
Really had a great time with it, and hopefully this is a commercial hit. We got to see this early at a Amazon Prime member exclusive screening for some reason.
Woo!
Still had to buy tickets, but whatever. But you know, it's getting a lot of really positive word of mouth. I would like to see more movies out of this franchise. What if we get another one? What would you like to see from it?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, because they have such franchise potential here. And, you know, I could see a sequel and then another sequel and another sequel in these years to come. And so I think what I would prefer, again, and I haven't played too much D&D, so, you know, I could just be maybe you know, classic D&D fans will have a different opinion than me, but I think that I would like to see another unique cast of characters. Maybe we could bring back one or two, like Forge or something like that, into the next movie. But I think I would like to see another story that's still set in the Forgotten Realms and is adjacent to this group, but it's not the same party. We get a new cast of characters, new people, maybe even new roles. You know, we could explore some roles that maybe we haven't seen yet. And it doesn't have to be a heist movie, but I think it should maintain the elements of this movie that succeeded, like the comedy, the variety of roles, the world building, this very clear end goal, and, you know, giving everyone in our party equal time on screen to really build their characters. So, you know, I don't really know where I would want to go next because I'm not familiar with the Forgotten Realms. But yeah, that's what I want to see, is a new group of characters set in the same world, doing something very fun and unique. What about you, Dylan? What would you like to see in a sequel?
Kind of a different direction than what you'd like. I would prefer the same cast of characters. I think the story is left open enough for continuation with them, and this is a good cast. But I would like to see maybe one or two additions, you know, complicate the dynamic of the party because everybody's getting along pretty well now.
Yeah.
You know, typical sequel stuff. But maybe add some other races in there that weren't represented from the lore. I'd also like to see some other fun locations. And but I agree, like double down on what works, which is the tone and the humor, and just keep being creative with it and keep translating the spirit of what made this one work as an adaptation of D&D. Shockingly good adaptation of a tabletop game, I would say.
And I would also throw in there too that I think we talked about this in the Last of Us review too, is that I think adaptations like this needs someone steering the ship who is passionate about the project, understands the game in and out, and knows how to properly represent the world in question. Like, you know, we've talked about it with Assassin's Creed in the last review of like, that was just atrocious. And it's because the people that were leading the film just were just kind of were disrespectful to the lore,
Or they
and
didn't
just
know.
yeah, they didn't know it. They just didn't know it. They weren't aware of it. They didn't know how to properly represent things. And then you look at something like D&D here, and I'm positive that the creators played D&D plenty of times, and they
Yeah.
know how to properly represent this world. And I think that's going to be a crucial thing moving forward with these kinds of adaptations. Make sure someone who's steering the ship has played a lot of D&D.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing about adaptation that a lot of people don't, a lot of failed adapters don't really think about it. It's like adaptation is essentially translation, right? And you can't translate something if you don't know how to read the original language, right? Like
Yes.
you can, if you're translating, you can decide I'm going to make a change here or adjustment here to better fit this new language or medium. But if you don't understand the original thing, you can't translate it. So and that goes for video games, D&D, books, whatever. So it, you know, it's good to see people actually have an understanding of the thing they're adapting these days.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, full on recommendation from me for this.
Yes. Me too. Yeah. Totally recommend. Only complaints are more formulaic, structural, like, and that's something that they can't really control. So anything, yeah, I definitely appreciated this film. Very surprised by it. If you haven't seen it yet, please go watch it.
And with that, we'll move on to the next and final segment of our show. Just other stuff we've been watching or reading or playing. What have you been watching, Niles?
So I haven't really explored too much new media lately, what with the travel and everything. I just feel like it's been a very busy month
It
too.
has.
So I haven't had too much time to explore new things. I've been continuing on with things I've been watching, like Attack on Titan, which has just been riveting. I just finished the scouting mission. So they've returned back to base, and yeah, they were just decimated. So it's I'm very interested to see where it goes next. I hope it didn't spoil too much there, but yeah, I've been watching that. I've been keeping up with RuPaul's Drag Race. I've been keeping up with my other shows. The Mandalorian I need to catch up on.
Yep.
But I'm very pleased with this season so far. So I'm like a few episodes behind though, so that may change. And I finished reading The Man in the High Castle finally. So now I'm gonna turn to the Amazon adaptation, and I'm excited to watch that because I enjoyed the book a lot by Philip K. Dick, and from my understanding, he was planning to write a sequel, but just didn't get around to it. That's my understanding. I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that was the case. And I just wasn't entirely pleased with how it concluded. So I'm interested to see where the TV adaptation takes the series next. But that does it for me, really, of new stuff that I've been doing. But what about you, Dylan? What have you been up to?
So I played the Diablo 4 beta, which was a ton of fun. It gives you access to the prologue in Act 1. I did not finish the storyline. For Act 1, I didn't have enough time. But the gameplay was just so crisp. The world of the game is like oppressive and horrible as it should be. Diablo, if you didn't know, is like it seems very much inspired by like Christianity, angels versus demons, and it's just a fucking miserable place. And it's but it's very dark fantasy, and I love it, and I'm excited for it to come out in June. I'm continuing to read Heir to the Empire, which is pretty fun. I like it. Feelings remain about the same as they were in last episode. Like very fun read, but it is definitely very fan fiction-y. I don't know how people don't recognize that about these books, but there's lots of fun things to like about it.
Yeah.
And also, as of last night, I started Succession. Several years too late, but I think I'll be able to catch up by the time the show ends. I have 9 weeks to do that. I think I can manage.
Yeah. I'm sure you can catch up. How far are you in? Have you just watched like the first or second episode? Or?
Yeah, I watched the first 2 last night. They're really good. Like just such slimy rich people. It's very enjoyable. But they're all very interesting characters to watch, I would say. There's one scene where one of them, it's like they're playing baseball and he points to this like random little kid, and he's like, "You come play on our baseball team." And then he says, "I will give you $1 million if you hit a home run." And the kid does not make the home run, and he rips a check up in front of it.
Oh my God.
Terrible people.
What an asshole. Oh my
Yeah, it's
God.
awful. And he's like, "Oh, you were so close. Good job." And then he rips it up. It's terrible, but
Yeah, I was just reading an NPR article today on succession and the idea of nepotism, like succession planning of like, like so many corporations in America, not to get too off topic here, but yeah, so many corporations in America are like family run businesses where it's like the father has been working for like 20 plus years and then he hands it off to his oldest son and then the company just starts to wither and wither and wither. And then it's like, okay, now we got to sell off the company to all these people and stuff like that. But like Walmart, I can't even remember all the other ones, but Walmart's like a family-owned business.
Well, the Walton family owns Walmart, and then what? Purdue Pharmaceuticals is the Sattler family, like the most demonic people ever.
Yeah, and it was just a fascinating to read of just like how nepotism can just like totally just fuck up so many businesses, and how many businesses today are still kind of led by this nepotism too. So
yeah, well, I mean, they're basically the modern day royalty, right? Like, it's like a king passing on the kingdom to his shithead son, who then fucks everything up because he's like dumber.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, what the hell were we thinking? But yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in to Play Pause Rewind. We greatly appreciate all of you listeners tuning in and listening to us every week. Our next episode will be coming out in the next 2 weeks, and the topic I think is TBD. We will.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what we're going to talk about, but I mean, if we got time, maybe I'll get through the John Wick. Maybe we'll watch something else and talk about it. But yeah, if you like the podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, like, share, write us a review. We greatly appreciate all that stuff whenever you can. It just helps us out, and it just tells us, yeah, we're doing an okay job with this because we love producing this podcast. It's just something fun that we love doing. But until our next episode, Dylan, where can people follow you online?
On Twitter at D-Day Movies, on Instagram at DylanD1026, on YouTube at D-Day Movies, and on Twitch at D-Day_movies. Also, check out our TikTok and our new YouTube channel, Play Pause Rewind Videos, for more content. What about you? Where can people find you?
Just on Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. But yeah, if you like the content that we're putting out here, please follow us on Play Pause Rewind. We would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.